All right, what's up, everybody? This is Corey Capella with The War Within. How are we all doing today? So my big thing right now is this. I've been posting on my YouTube channel for a little while. I paused for a little while just due to a lot of stuff going on in life. But man, I've been wanting to do a podcast for a long time. And I figure the best way to start this off would probably be to let you guys all know exactly what this is about, the direction I want to go, and who exactly I am. So I'll give you a little bit of a backstory today. So if you have the time, sit back and enjoy the ride because we're starting off with the War Within podcast starting today. This is the first episode. Let's see how it goes. Well, let's start off with what the War Within is. I kind of increased the idea of the direction I want to go with this. And I'm excited to share with you that the War Within is going to encompass a whole lot more than what I originally started off with. I would say that when I first started the YouTube channel, I was just getting out of a funk, which I'm surprised I got out of. I'm very grateful that I got out of. I was suffering from quite a bit of depression and anxiety, and it's something that had lasted for about 2 years or so. And I think a lot of the notes that I was focusing on were still that part. And that's, in a way, what I was talking about with the War Within was the conflict and the internal struggles. And what I consider the War Within to be, honestly, is it's a fight between the dark and the light. It's a fight between what Carl Jung would consider the shadow self and certain archetypes that are deep within us. And it's this constant battle of struggle of trying to let the light prevail. And what I'm really trying to get people into to focus on is maintaining a balance for that. So that's what the War Within is going to focus on. Is we're gonna talk about some of the deeper stuff as far as the psyche is concerned and where we find ourselves emotionally. And mainly, I'm trying to appeal in general to people that have had traumatic upbringings, traumatic past, traumatic instances. So post-traumatic stress, whether you be a veteran that suffered wartime stresses, which I'm going to go ahead and come out and say right away that I think that the wartime stuff may have just been an exacerbated case from something that occurred way earlier on. So I'm going to talk a lot about childhood trauma and childhood patterns that I guess led to us having this crack in ourself to lead down the road of depression in our later years. So that's what I definitely like to talk about is personal issues, some of the deeper subjects such as depression and anxiety, even darker, getting in and talking about suicidal thoughts and suicidal tendencies and getting ourselves out of that. But just in general, also, I would say just understanding toxic patterns, toxic people, patterns that you may have seen that continue to play out in your lives. These are all things that play into the War Within, where we're going to continue to have struggle between this, like I said, this shadow self that comes in and tries to sabotage us on a good path and trying to live in the light, which I'd also say is a huge problem. I see a lot of people just trying to live in light and completely negating or trying to push away the shadow self, which is in a state of balance. So you're always going to live in a state of unbalance, which isn't healthy either. Some of the other things I want to talk about, some alternative methods to handling depression and anxiety. And that's going to be through going against the conventional way of just going through the medicinal route that we find ourselves going into. I'm not a very big fan of pharmaceuticals, as you'll hear in my story. I tend to focus more on holistic approaches. Meditation is a gigantic piece. I love acupuncture and getting into a lot of the Eastern ways of handling the battle that we face ourselves, or we see ourselves with this war within that I discuss. Psychotherapy, and then last, I'd like to definitely get into entheogenic therapy, which you guys may have heard discussed on the Joe Rogan podcast or Aubrey Marcus or a few other people out there. There's a group that I just joined on Facebook called Veterans for Entheogenic Therapy. I'm excited to hear what they have to say. Shout out to you guys. I'd definitely like to get in there and talk to you guys more and see what you guys are doing. Some other things too here that I'd like to talk about is just positive mentorship through discussing proper strategies. So one of my claim to fames right now that I'd like to get out there is this, and it's a pretty bold statement, I believe, is that I think I cured my PTSD. Do I have days that are bad still? Yeah, sometimes. But I would say it's no different than normal individuals. And I feel I'm at a point now where I'm able to discuss this openly with other individuals and even help establish some types of protocols to get people out of that dark hole, out of that suicidal hole, and work through depression and anxiety to get back to living a state of balance. And, balance is happiness. I got to be real with you guys there. So you're not going to be living in elation constantly. This isn't going to be some crazy serotonin, oxytocin rush where you wake up every day and you're like, hell yeah, I'm going to go fuck the world. You know what? I kind of do feel that sometimes where I'm like, hell yeah, like, let's go tackle this shit. But what I want to discuss, and hopefully I want to, it's not just going to be me the whole time. This pattern, this model that you're seeing today is just me introducing the war within to you guys. So it's not just going to be me bumping my gums the entire time. I'm going to try to bring on a lot of different people who have a lot of different perspectives, open people's eyes. Maybe there's somebody out there that you connect with better than I do, and I want to bring them on and have you listen. Maybe it's something right up your alley with the purpose that you see in life, and you want to get involved in that. So I'm just hoping to bring in a wealth of knowledge when it comes to positive mentorship. Like I said, strategies are good outlets. I'm big on that. There's at least 4 or 5 non-negotiables I have in my life. One of them is psychotherapy. I see a therapist every week, once a week, every week. I meditate every day. I have to work out at least 4 times a week, and then I have to go to jiu-jitsu at least 2 to 3 times a week in order to maintain this balance that I consider. And on top of a few other things, I think eating healthy is gigantic as well, and I'm sure you guys are going to hear me talk plenty about that as well. So it's having the proper outlets. It's having the proper channels to be able to work through your issues. Whew, man, yeah. And then it's also finding the right group. I'm a dude. People are gonna look at me right now and they're gonna see a pretty masculine male. I'm former military. I'm a former Marine. I'm a combat veteran. I've worked with some pretty high level individuals as far as special operations are concerned. And I've done some pretty amazing and miraculous stuff in that department. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest things too, I think, is that being in that environment around what we expect to be this masculine or what we describe as masculine traits, we never really once talk about, feminine traits in males and what's acceptable and how we can, allow those to become a part of us. Like I said, everything's balance. Balancing between the male and female energies is gigantic. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to become more of a mentor for men out there and let them know that it's okay to talk about your issues. It's okay to admit weakness. It's okay to be fragile in certain environments, because there's going to be a bunch of other men that have been through it, that have been in your shoes, that understand exactly what you're going through. And it's okay to lean on those guys, because I'll tell you what, if you choose not to, you're going to find yourself at a disadvantage, because you're going to be holding on to all that and you're never going to be able to heal from the wounds of your past. And I truly believe that it takes men to heal men, just like I believe it takes veterans to heal veterans as well. And I do believe that women also need to heal women. I think that men and women do have a role in each other's lives, but when it comes to healing and being able to identify with each other, we're chemically different, and we are also, as far as our brains operate, I'm not saying that men are smart or anything like this, but men operate on a little bit more of a rational level, and women operate a little bit more on a emotional level. And this is something that I'm trying to really help out with as far as balance is concerned, because if a man is too rational and just completely omits his emotions, he's going to walk through life as a robot, and he's never going to deal with the emotional body that is important to deal with. So that's where I'm going with this, really, is that I'm trying to bring balance to the male psyche. And hopefully this will be a better way for men to live in the future as well. Moving on, the other thing I want to do is, like I said, I want to bring more guests on here as well. I'm going to try to search the Twitter sphere, internet sphere, YouTube sphere, and contact key individuals that are doing good things. Hopefully veterans too. That'd be great. I definitely like to promote more veteran businesses or veteran nonprofits that are working in a very similar light as where I'm going. And it doesn't need to be just that. I'd like to find people that are doing great research with holistic medicines, plant-based medicines, entheogenic medicines as well. People that are working within the psychotherapy area that are starting to crack the code a little bit more with trauma. I love Jungian psychology and philosophy as far as that's concerned, so getting people on here to talk about that. Bringing men on here that are working with other men to help them go in the direction that, like I was just talking about, working through a lot of their issues with a little bit more of an emotional approach. Bringing people on here just to talk about politics, tell their story about getting through PTSD. I can't believe that I would be the only one that has worked their way through this. So it'd be great to hear other people's stories. I've seen through that, through sharing where I'm also part of a group. It's a men's group, even though we did start to bring in a few females, but it's a veterans group as well, where we talk about very similar things that I'm discussing right now, all the good things that are working out for us as after being suicidal and hitting rock bottom and such. And every single time I'm in there, I just see people's heads nodding as someone else is telling their story. And it's because they've been there. And one of the biggest things is other people out there don't, especially when you're in that situation, when you're really deep in the darkness, you don't believe that anyone else there understands the situation that you're in, and you really feel isolated and all alone. And then the next thing is you feel as though this is going to be something that lasts forever, like you're never going to get yourself out of this mental state. So that's something that I'd like to share with other people as well, and hopefully they're listening. So in a nutshell, that's the war within. That's where I want to go with it. I'm really looking forward to this. I hope you guys are just as excited as I am. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've kind of given you a little bit of light as to who I am, just briefly. But as I said, my name's Corey Capella. I am 32 years old. I grew up in Connecticut, very East Coast Italian family, very hard-headed and stubborn. And their belief system was, especially when it came to boys, that boys needed to be hammered on and they needed to be toughened up and so on. So I had a very aggressive father. At the age of 7, my father began to physically assault me, physically beat me, and it wasn't always clear as to the motivation as to why. He'd always kind of find a reason just to go off the handle. And he would just literally like rage out, right? And for that to happen, I mean, he was a 280-pound, 6-foot man, pretty muscular, and he would just go full rage monster on me, as though I was somebody his size and his age and had experience fighting. He would just go pretty nuts whenever he decided he needed to, and that left me in a state, obviously, where it's a traumatic event, and if it continues and when it continues, you don't know what's going to happen. It really sends a lot of mixed messages. So obviously that messed with my brain chemistry growing up. And then the other thing too was my father was very emotionally and verbally abusive as well. So any given time he would just decide to cut you down. He was a bully. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. He's a big bully. My mom, very sweet lady, very naive though, and just kind of kept that traditional belief system to keep the family together. So when it came to it and my dad was doing these things, she just kind of turned away. I remember one time she did defend me, and she came to my aid, and I believe she threatened to call the cops. And I remember my dad taking her into another room after that, and after that day, my mom never stood up to him again. So she decided to stay with him. Man, that's tough to talk about. And my father had chose my sister pretty much as a favorite. So it was a real crazy case. My sister was this princess, and I was kind of this stepchild in a way, where I was the one always having to do all the work around the house, and my sister kind of just got to sit on her own. And if my sister committed a crime, let's say, something similar to what I would do, my sister would never get beat for it. She would actually it would get dismissed. So there was a huge double standard growing up, and it was crazy because 2003 is when I graduated. We had just invaded Iraq about 6 months prior. I knew I wanted to get out of my household. I knew I didn't want to go to college, and I had been looking at the Marine Corps for about 6 months prior to that. 9/11 was a big thing too. Even though I got my opinions on that, we'll save that for another episode. I just felt like that was the only option where I could have a secure lifestyle, and maybe even part of me I'd say there was a part of me that was suicidal, obviously because I grew up with a feeling of zero worth or zero value. So me going and throwing myself out there as cannon fodder was completely okay. I also wanted to get some kind of man training. My father never raised me up teaching me a lot of stuff, really telling me how men should behave. And ultimately, that was the draw too. Like, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to be able to be mentored and be a man. And hopefully if I go to war, that's ultimately the ultimate test of a man. There was something deep down inside of me, this subconscious drive to go to combat and test myself. Because in my eyes, and I think even in society's eyes, that was the ultimate test of manhood. So I joined the Marine Corps. I didn't find myself in Iraq until 2008. So I joined in 2004, and I didn't find myself in Iraq until 2008. I was in a non-combat unit, and I remember something occurring when I was sitting there in a bunker. I'll throw it out there. I'll be real with everybody, all my military friends out there listening. I joined the military trying to be a door gunner, and I signed up under aviation operations because I was told that I had to be a crew chief. And then I got lumped into aviation operations, which made me a weather observer. And then I became a weather forecaster under that MOS. And I was sitting in Iraq in 2008 forecasting the weather, which, mind you, played a huge role. I played a huge role in Iraq, trust me. I had to forecast all the weather for everyone's operations. And I think I was about a month or so in, and I forgot the Marines' names. I'm bad with that right now. My cognition's still coming back. Maybe I'll look it up. But I believe it was in April. I got there in April, so this happened in May, I think about a month afterwards. I was a sergeant sitting on Al-Taqaddum TQ, big fob, in this bunker right on the airfield. And all of a sudden, across the SIPRNet, which is a secret computer for those of you who are listening and don't know, we got a report that 2 Marines had just been killed by a suicide bomber. And the story came across my computer and pretty much let me know exactly how these Marines were killed. And what had occurred was a cement truck was loaded, packed full of explosives. So this was a suicide truck. And it was going into this base in Ramadi. And it was going through this serpentine. So the serpentine barricades, what it does is it slows vehicles so that they can't just plow into it. We kind of learned our lesson from Beirut back in 83. And this vehicle started to speed up through the serpentine heading towards the gate. And the 2 Marines on guard, a corporal and a lance corporal, just started to unload their service weapon. I believe it was a 240. I believe it was actually a 249. I think it was a saw. And they stopped the driver right within that serpentine, but the driver detonated the explosives, killing those 2 Marines. Now, what's heroic about this is not just that, but they responded just insanely fast. Because had they not responded, there was actually a barracks right behind them full of their platoon, and the platoon was working with the Iraqi police at the time, so it was a police barracks for Ramadi, and it would have wiped out over 150 people easily. So here I am. I'm forecasting the weather behind this bunker far, far away. I think the month that I got into Iraq, literally all significant actions besides the one I just mentioned pretty much dropped off. They were barely mortaring the base anymore. It was literally as though like all action had ceased. And I believe I was about 24 at the time. And I just remember feeling complete guilt and complete shame in myself. Here I was, really in shape figure who joined the Marine Corps to make a difference. And these 2 19, 20-year-old kids were out in the front line of Iraq, and they just died. And here I was behind this bunker, completely safe from the war zone. I mean, let's be real. There was some threat, but I remember in that instance just feeling complete shame and guilt. And I was just thinking of a way, like if I could do something. I remember thinking, I wish there was a job out there where you can go and find out information before they happen so that you can let these people know, like let these Marines know so that they can be on the lookout, or so that we could prevent the suicide bomb from happening, completely allowing us to save the lives of fellow Marines. And I remembered a buddy of mine telling me back in forecasting school about counterintelligence, and it just clicked. And I sat there the rest of the night just researching how to get into counterintelligence in the Marine Corps. And I remember making a phone call back to California that night, asking how to go through the process, getting emails back and forth. And, from there, I decided to go counterintel. I dedicated my whole life and whole existence to doing that. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get on the front line, and I wanted to save Marines' lives, but I also wanted to go and get some too. So I ended up moving to counterintelligence, which is a pretty high level job. Got a pretty good bonus too while I was sitting there in Iraq, tax free. And so the second I got back from Iraq in October, I got all my stuff ready, checked out of my unit, checked into my unit here in Pendleton in December. I was going to the schoolhouse in January 5th, I believe. Water. So here I am. I'm a counterintel dude going through one of the toughest schools. I believe it's the second at that point in time. It was the second toughest school. It had the second highest dropout rate in comparison to any other school, except for the number one being Buds. So it's had the highest dropout rate besides Buds. Pretty prestigious job. We were on the same base as SEAL Team 6, so it was, pretty high level shit. Graduated the schoolhouse, got put on a team right when I got back, and we pretty much got the warning order from there that we were going to attach to 3-7 and we were going to shoot into Afghanistan in the beginning of 2010. Super excited for that. So deployed to Afghanistan in March, I think end of March, beginning of April 2010. Worked with 3-7 the entire time. Really amazing infantry unit. These guys were sharp as attack. Actually, sharp as a fucking katana. These guys were brutal. Really amazing Marines. I was honored to serve with these guys. The first few months of the deployment, actually first 2 months of the deployment, I spent a little bit of time. It was pretty weird. Going into Afghanistan at this time was like, this is right when the plus up was going on in 2010. We were one of the first units back in there really with this plus up. It was like cowboys and Indians over there. We had bases all over the place that were pretty much self-sustaining and on their own. It was hard to get to the distances there, so we had to fly things in. We had to get cargo drops often. So the first place I was at, I stayed for about 3 weeks. I was out in Bujibast Pass. There was nothing going on. And then I got the order that I was going to go with another company, right? I got put with Kilo Company, I believe, and got to get a little bit of combat there. Nothing too crazy. It was really just us taking taking care of some of the bad guys there. It wasn't bad. Barely getting any ID blast. But then as I came back, I got the word. It was like a 3-week trip. I got the word after I came back that I was going into Sangin. I was going to be one of the first 14 Americans to go into this location. And from what I heard about Sangin at this point in time is the Brits were getting their butts handed to them, so they were switching out with the Americans because we had more resources. So yeah, went into Sangin, Afghanistan. Pretty crazy. About 2 or 3 days before me going into Sangin, Afghanistan, they had shot down Pedro 6-6. Taliban shot down a pararescue, Air Force pararescue, pretty solid special operations group. They shot down their helicopter. Everybody on board died. Pretty tragic stuff. So that was pretty much the extent I knew of going in there, is that we were going up against some pretty heavily armed enemy. So I went in there probably around beginning of June, end of June maybe. And yeah, it was everything it was cracked up to be. I mean, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we found ourselves up on the wall defending ourselves from enemy attack. Mortared all the time. IEDs galore. I mean, we were literally locked into the base. I remember, I probably went on patrol a few times. I was going out there to look for potential sources and source operations. And I'll tell you what, every time you went out there, it was crazy because there's so many IEDs out there. It was the scariest thing in the world, honestly. You feared every step you took. And on July 16th, 2010, I actually found myself at the shit end of the stick. Taliban pretty much watched all our patterns. We ended up stepping on two dismounted IEDs that day on patrol. The first IED killed my good friend, Justice Bartel. Watched the mayhem happen there. We took 2 casualties. Well, we took 1 KIA and we took 1 KIA and 1 casualty. We ran over to go and assess and obviously triage our wounded. And at that point in time, I was tasked with collecting some of the equipment that had obviously been ripped off of these Marines, 40 Commando British Marines, and then obviously Justice was a U.S. Marine. And I had to go to the bottom of this JDAM crater where a bunch of our stuff had gone down there and was on fire from this IED explosion. I went to go pick up some of the stuff and put out some of the fire, and I grabbed a bag, and little did I know that there was a Valen battery on the backside of it that was completely exposed from the fire, and it just electrocuted me. I was crazy. I remember grabbing this shit and grabbing this battery by accident, and it just sent this electrical charge through me, and it I could feel the point of where it was, and it zapped me in my ass, and I felt like I got shot. And I started running up this embankment. I just dropped everything. I was screaming, oh, fuck. I thought I just got shot, which would have been weird. I was at the bottom of a JDAM crater. So I ran to the top, and, people, I don't know if really anybody really noticed that. So I ran to the top of the crater, and then somebody just grabbed me, and they're like, hey, help us start clearing this route for us to casevac these Marines that are injured. And as I started moving, I was a third in the back. So there's one person, 2 people in front of me. And as that person in the front started walking, I remember watching him explode in front of my eyes. So the first one was about 80 to 100 meters away from me. The second one was literally 15 feet away from me. Just launched me into this wall. I remember laying on the ground and waiting for all the dust to settle. And I just remember being like, fuck, this is my worst nightmare ever. So that was Marine John Crooks, British Royal Marine. And then I remember the other individual that was right in front of me. He started turning as the explosion occurred, and I remember him getting just a bunch of shrapnel up his leg and ass and stuff like that, and he was pretty much incapacitated from that, but still with us and alive. Oh, wow, yeah, talking about this is pretty crazy. So after that, what ended up occurring is we obviously had to casevac 2 KIA and 3 wounded. We called in another squad. They started to come in and help us out. They let us know that there was another IED on the trail that they had marked, and we started to move out our casualties and our gear that was obviously left behind and such. We had to cross about a 140-yard wide open field. And the crazy part was I didn't know where that IED was. So I carried Crooksy across with 3 other people on the litter. I remember, I'm carrying 80 to 100, actually I'm carrying over 100 pounds of gear that day. It's 132 degrees out. It's the middle of the day. Just went through what is known as hell to me in that mindset or that perspective. And carry these people across this field, or carry Crooksy across that field and drop him off at our casualty collection point so he can get rushed back to our base for help. And I remember hitting the ground as I dropped him off. It was the hardest workout I'd ever done in my life. I'd just gone through such crazy events. And I remember this one Marine, 40 Commando, his name was Smudge. He just starts screaming at us because everybody that was carrying that litter and all that other stuff just hit the deck. And Smudge starts screaming. He's like, we got more Marines out there. He's like, get your asses up. We got more Marines back there that are injured. They need your help. And I remember, like, the second he said that, I just jumped up, like, didn't give a shit about the exhaustion level that I was in, and just ran back across that field. And one thing I remember is that nobody else did. Nobody else got up. And the reason why was, I remember as, I ran across this field and I grabbed it was actually a ladder that this other individual was on. I think it was the individual that was in front of me, the one with the wounded ass. I grabbed the ladder, and as soon as I grabbed the ladder and started turning to run, I realized that everybody else that had been yelled at by Smudge to join me wasn't there. They were all lined up about 100 yards away from me on this embankment, just laying waste, right? And then what I realized at that moment was we were being shot at by 4 enemy machine gun positions in this open field, and I had just run back across, and now I'm running back too in this open field getting shot at. An RPG explodes about 200 feet above my head, and I'm just like, what the fuck? This is crazy. We're getting L-shaped ambush by the enemy. So I dropped that casualty off with the 3 other people helping carry that litter. And those people carrying the litter just ran right over to the berm and started returning fire on this village that was firing at us and such. And I remember sitting there thinking, we got more stuff, or we got more people back there. I remember the words of this Marine that yelled at me prior to it. He's like, we got to get back there. So I ran back. Wide open, getting shot at in this field. I didn't give a shit what was going on. I just ran back there, and as I ran back and I got to the edge of where those 2 IEDs exploded, there were 2 or 3 other Marines, British Royal Marines, and they're like, hey man, there's no other casualties here, but we're going to go another way, obviously, because we're getting fucking shot at, we're getting ambushed, they're going to go a different way. They're like, hey, carry this gear. It was like 2 rifles and a backpack full of magazines and stuff like that. So I strapped all the gear over my back, and I just hoofed it back across this path. I'm not sure if they're, still not sure where the IED was or anything like that. It was, pretty scary. But, I just had to do in that moment what I had to do. So I ran back, and I just ran up on this berm, and I saw the other Marine that was on patrol, other American Marine that was on patrol with us. His name's Brian Keene. And I ran up to him, and I just jumped on this berm. And I was like, dude, where's the fucking enemy? And he's just like, just start shooting. So I started fucking laying waste and trying to put some rounds wherever enemy possibly could be, Didn't really have much of an idea of what was going on. By that point in time, our base, like the big machine guns and stuff like that, were just dumping rounds, and everything was covered in smoke, and, you didn't know what the heck was going on. But we ended up running to another base nearby to take cover and reload, reassess, and then ended up having to run back. It was about 3 or 4 hour ordeal, and just sheer craziness, absolute craziness. And the remainder of that deployment was no different, right? 3-7 came in, and we were under enemy fire for quite a long time, and shit, I lost a few more friends to IEDs and such. Master Sergeant Dan Fetter was one of them, a good friend of mine too. EOD tech, 14 or 15 years in the Corps, something like that. 14-year-old kid, 12-year-old kid at that time. Anyway, yeah, it was pretty wild, and I came back later that year. What happened during that deployment, as well as I recall, the colonel of the base, Colonel Paul Kennedy, really good dude. He's from Connecticut. I'm from Connecticut. We really got along. I remember him saying something about writing me up for a very high and prestigious award, telling my officer, my lieutenant at the time, or relaying the message to write me up for an award. And that kind of cheered me up a little bit. I know that sounds a little egotistical, but at the same time, it kind of cheered me up that someone was looking over my back, especially for what I had just gone through. It was almost like putting a Band-Aid on it. And, at least for the rest of my life, I was going to be able to have some pride and honor about the situation. But come to find out, towards the end of that deployment, my officer never wrote me up for it. And it got worse than that. What I had found out actually was that lieutenant and a bunch of other officers had in a way, pretty much conspired behind my back, and they had decided that they weren't going to write me up for this ward because I could give you the real reasons as to why, but their reasons were they didn't want my ego to get too inflated. I don't know whose ego they were really protecting, mine or theirs, but yeah. Anyway, what ended up happening was there was some stink. My chief pretty much cornered my lieutenant, was like, dude, what the fuck? Like, if Capella got injured, if he got injured there, you would have written him up for a Silver Star, no problem. But because he didn't, you're not writing him up for shit. So I ended up getting a nice little hand-me-down. I got the lowest award you can give someone. I got a Navy, I got a NAM, Navy Achievement Medal with a Valor device. And that really set the tone when I got back from Afghanistan as to how well my command was going to take care of me. I had gone home about 3 weeks after I came back and just started drinking with some friends and got into an altercation with some cops. I'll tell you the story about that later on, but let's just say that the cops had antagonized my friend. They were arresting him for taking a hot dog bun. I offered the cops $5, or the owner of the business $5 for it, and told the cops that it was a stupid reason to arrest my friend. Another cop pulls up and starts antagonizing a fight with me, and it kind of just went from there. I recall, now I'm no perfect angel. I'm no perfect angel in this one, but I was pretty highly intoxicated. I was still really wound up from war. I just saw my friend get arrested and taken away from the enemy. So I was still in Marine mode. I was still in wartime mode. So I believe, and I think I remember this pretty well, I remember trying to walk up to the cop car door and opening the door, and then I just got fucking beat. I got the shit kicked out of me by 5 cops. I got a fucking scar on my forehead from it. It's probably why I'm balding so well too. We'll blame it on them. Yeah, and then one of the cops actually ended up calling my command rather than calling my family because he had it out for me. I ended up getting in trouble for it. Even though it was just a breach of peace charge, there was nothing that happened. I went to see the DA. They made me just do 14 hours of community service to get the case expunged or whatever. But my command, like I said, as you could see, they don't really give a shit about PTSD or taking care of Marines when they get back from wartime. Now it's time for us to. I remember the words that were said to me right when I got back. My first sergeant at the time, right when we got off the bus, she said to us, she's like, all right, hey, Marines, we're giving you 96 hours to take a little rest. When you come back on Tuesday morning, make sure you're in clean camis again and you got a fresh haircut, fresh shave. Get ready to act like real Marines again. And like I said, man, that set the tone. That set the tone for what my command was going to really do for us, because they didn't consider what we were doing over there in Afghanistan what real Marines do, right? There's this hue of jealousy because of the fact that we were doing like the real warrior stuff, and they had to sit back and do the desk jockey shit, and the pen is mightier than the sword, so they got to fuck with us due to their own egotistical bullshit. Either way, what ended up happening, with the whole thing, with the whole NJP, with the whole award thing, obviously I had a target on my back at this point in time, and people just, they wanted to hate. I was pretty pissed off about it. I was pretty wounded from my experiences. I felt as though my experiences over in Afghanistan were not valued. So it's another thing really that showed me exactly how I was treated by my father, and it really set a bad taste in my mouth. So I decided to get out of the Marine Corps. I opened up my own CrossFit gym. I was a pretty high-level CrossFit competitor at the time. Decided to open up my own gym and did some pretty remarkable stuff. But what ended up happening was, I really buried everything. I was seeing a counselor before I got out. About 6 months before I got out, they had pretty much diagnosed me with PTSD and put me on some pharmaceutical medication. I was taking a pretty low dose, I think about 40 milligrams of Cymbalta. It made me feel a lot better. But I was promised by that doctor that we would only try this out for about 6 to 9 months, and then after that we would go through a weaning process and get me off. And now that I was a veteran and I was out, I was actually part of the Veterans Administration, which told me quite the contrary. They actually wanted to bump me up a lot more on a lot more medications. My psychiatrist rather would only see me for about 8 to 10 minutes. We'll go a little bit longer. We'll say 15 minutes. And the whole conversation was just about my medication, how I felt with medication. There was no hope of me getting off of my medication. That's the only route that they wanted to go about doing. And then they wanted to put me into some type of therapy, like a relapse therapy where you continue to live the situation over and over and over. And that proved to not be effective, so I stopped doing that. So I owned my own gym for a little while. At some point later on, I just decided that I hated taking the medication. I didn't feel like it was really helping. It started to turn me into more of a drone. I felt soulless. I felt disenfranchised from my own individuality and my own masculinity. I decided to start using cannabis, and one of the big things too for that was the fact that running my own gym, I was working 90 hours. Somebody said something to me at some point. They said, yeah, you don't own the business owns you. And I just started to kind of tumble downhill. I wasn't getting a lot of help. I wasn't asking for a lot of help. And I started to slow down. And then I started to use cannabis thinking that it was a far better medicine than taking pharmaceuticals, which in some way, shape, or form I still do agree with. But it is also this is not going to win over a lot of fans here, but it is also a substance. It is a hallucinatory and psychotropic substance, and it does give you false senses of pleasure, which those addictions to pleasure tend to play out sometimes. So I started to abuse it far too much. I had some amazing experiences with cannabis. I can't knock it. I learned a lot about myself. I really think cannabis, what it does is it really tears down your ego and allows you to see certain things. It really pulled up to me a lot of the things that I had buried for a long time. So what ended up happening with the use of this cannabis is it really brought to light the amount of PTSD that I had in my life from the trauma of my childhood, from the belief systems I held about myself, addictions that I had, patterns that I had, my addiction to toxic relationships, the reason why I couldn't ever enter a good relationship, and even the values that I had towards myself, like I had said, which wasn't very good. As I started to see my gym make less and less money, or not less and less, but kind of just never grow, I decided to start growing cannabis. So I started renting a house and started growing cannabis out of that house. And pretty soon my PTSD, it was enough of a break for me to slow down and kind of relax a little bit. And that monkey just jumped on my back and it tore me down. And I ended up going into some pretty gnarly depressive episodes and had some pretty insane anxiety. And then from the cannabis use, I was probably ingesting about 250 milligrams daily of edibles and having some pretty hallucinatory experiences. Some very mystical experiences as well, but also some pretty bad stuff. I shouldn't say too bad, but not very constructive. It led me to research a little bit more. I actually found Joe Rogan's podcast through that. A friend of mine, well, let's call him an acquaintance. I wouldn't call him a friend. An acquaintance of mine pointed me in the direction at that point in time. He's like, dude, you should really start a podcast, or at least listen to Joe's podcast, because I'd go on these rants and talk about some pretty cool stuff. But he's like, hey man, you should check out ayahuasca. It's some really cool stuff when it comes to healing PTSD. And I listened to Aubrey Marcus and a few other people, I guess, discuss ayahuasca on the podcast, and it put it in the back of my mind. And then pretty soon I found myself, I actually put myself into a mental hospital for a little while, just because I was worrying people and I was claiming certain things and having some really crazy hallucinatory spiritual experiences. And I ended up going to the mental hospital for about 4 days. And then I was just like, wow, I'm not crazy. The people in there were pretty crazy and I wasn't. So I was like, yo, get me the fuck out of here. I feel pretty good. They got my medication back up and running. And then after about 3 weeks of exiting that, I was just like, man, fuck this. I'm back to square one. I'm back on this medication. I don't want to be here. I fucking hate it. I hate it being in my body. I can just feel it. It's synthetic. It's not natural. And I just felt this call. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe later I'll explain it to you guys, but I just felt this call. It felt like my soul was reaching out to this plant medicine, ayahuasca. And then I just kind of kept seeing these signs. And I ended up booking a flight down there. It was literally the last of my money. I had like $816 in my bank account. I bought this plane ticket, $809 to get me down to Peru, to Iquitos, Peru, and I was just like, fuck it, I'm going. I don't give a shit what happens. I just saw this documentary about a former Marine who had opened up his own ayahuasca place down there with a shaman called Manculto. I didn't really hear much about it. I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go find this guy. He's gonna resonate with my story. He's going to understand how much I need this kind of deal. Hopefully it'll all work out, right? Well, come to find out, that place was closed down, and Manculto, the shaman, was in jail for killing a kid a year prior by putting MDMA and some other shit in the brew. So I found myself down in Iquitos. Well, actually, scratch that. Let's fast or rewind a little bit. I was actually in El Salvador, I believe, and I ran into the only other white guy that was on the plane, and he's like, "You're going to Iquitos, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, how'd you know?" And he's like, "You're going to do ayahuasca, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, how'd you know?" And he's like, "Me too." And he's like, "What's your story?" And I kind of went through this whole crazy spiel at this point in time, and I was like, "I don't have any money. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing." And he's like, "Fuck, man." Like, I had to go through this whole process of like being interviewed, and the group that I'm with is very hand selected, and we're going through this really spiritual process and all this other stuff. And I was like, damn, I'm just looking to go and drink the brew. I don't give a shit who does it or whatever. And I'm trying to heal, and my biggest thing was to heal PTSD and get off those medications. Like, I never wanted to touch a pharmaceutical again. And I wanted to prove to myself that it could be healed. And he's like, "Dude, do me a favor." He's like, "Take this $100, just in case, you need to buy a hotel down there." But he's like, "Here, follow me, stick with me. We'll at least get you to my shaman, and we'll talk to my shaman and see if there's anybody there in Iquitos or whatnot that'll be good at helping, or that'll be, good to help you out with the amount of money that you have and all this other stuff." And I was like, all right, cool. So we get down there and we meet his shaman, and his shaman just comes up and sits quietly next to me. She's just like 5-foot redhead from Australia, just super like introverted, and just sits there and like feels me out. And I feel like I'm like being spiritually interviewed. It's crazy. And after about an hour or so of just sitting there quietly, she's like, "What's your purpose here? What are you doing?" And I pulled this bottle of prescription pills out of my pocket, and I shake them and I say, "I want off these things." And she just snatches them out of my hands, goes into this room with Bernardino, who is the actual ayahuasquero. She's training to be an ayahuasquero, but Bernardino owns the land in Peru, and they go in there for like an hour, and all I hear is like, I see smoke coming through their door, and I hear rattles back there and all this other stuff. And she comes out about an hour and a half later, and she's like, "All right, the spirits are saying that you need to come with us deep into the Peruvian Amazon for a week, and we need to do a series of cleanses on you. And I'm not sure if you can drink ayahuasca because of the fact that you've been on these SSRIs before, but it would be beneficial for you to just come out there and at least do some cleanses." And I was like, fuck, all right. I was kind of disappointed because like I'd gone down there wanting to do ayahuasca, and I felt like a failure in this moment, But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this. I'm going to go with my gut, and I'm just going to do it. It's still going to be a great experience. So we take a 2.5 hour boat ride down the Amazon, or sorry, down the which river is it? Yeah, I think. Anyway, and we go deep into the rainforest into Bernardino's tribe land. It's his ancestral land, and man, it's crazy. The second I got into the rainforest, I just started throwing up. Like, it was crazy how alive like this rainforest is. Like, just insane. And get to bed that night, wake up the next morning, and we're literally living off of just plantains and tea and yeah, that's about it. I think we made some like lemongrass soup, which is actually quite delicious. And then the next day we started these cleansing processes, and I'm sure I'll go into the cleansing processes more. I'm not going to bore you guys with it all right now. But either way, I saw some miraculous, went through these cleanses, and about day 4 after we finished brewing the ayahuasca, Bernardino came up to me and he's like, the spirit spoke to me and said that you are to drink ayahuasca in ceremony with us tonight. And I was like, damn, this is legit. And then Winona, the Australian's like, well, the thing is we got to treat you like a child right now. So you're only going to be able to drink as much as like a child would be able to drink, which was a shot glass. So 1 ounce, 2 times, which is plenty for me at this point in time. And probably one of the most, it was probably the most, I don't know the words, but it was probably the greatest moment of my life going down there, and just seeing what I saw and the experiences that I had and everything tied together. It was just remarkable. And, they say that ayahuasca is the mountain mover. What it does is just shapes your life and just gets rid of all the bullshit. The destroyer gets rid of all the bullshit. And, the second I came home, gym closed down. I went bankrupt. I was homeless. I fucking lost my home. And I had to find my way, and I literally found myself at rock bottom, and it was the first time I found myself being suicidal. And I had to fight through that, and I had to fight through the VA system in order to get my PTSD rating up, and it just turned into like 2.5 years of going through all sorts of stuff, of being homeless and broke, and cleansing myself of just terrible relationships that I found myself falling victim and prey to prior to. And also, not just that, I found myself also, before the house closed down, going through and trying out a lot more entheogenic and hallucinatory material. So I became quite the psychotropic or psychonaut, really searching my consciousness after that and trying to expand my consciousness, and I learned a lot from that stuff. I was doing it all under the intention to heal my PTSD and get my brain back, and I had to end up, ayahuasca had pretty much told me that I had to quit smoking marijuana, which was a tough fight to get me through, and I've really had to build myself back up since then. And it got to a point where I had to ask for help. I had to become vulnerable enough to ask for help and reach out and try to find certain things and find certain people. And not a lot of things worked, and I met a lot of roadblocks, and I still had this depression. I still had this anxiety. I was dead broke, dead tired a lot. And I had to really pull myself out of that. And I think the biggest thing too was I had to pull myself out of this chasm that I found myself in, especially when it came to suicide. I was obsessed with dying for a little while. I felt like the universe wanted me dead. I felt like this universe was a very malevolent thing. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot that that was the story that I was being told by other people. It was the mindset that people had instilled into me. And that, I was looking for a savior. I was a victim for a long time, and that I was looking for other people to come and pull me out and help me out. And, I found some people that helped me out in certain ways, but there was no way, shape, or form that they were digging me out of the hole. They were just putting me out in situations to help me develop the mindset that I have now. And it came to a point where I actually ran into a friend that helps. He's actually the one that runs the men's program that I was talking about, or the veterans program, Sparta. I've gone through some amazing groups and learned about meditation and accepted meditation as an amazing healing tool. And we'll hopefully, with the War Within, we'll talk about some cognitive stuff here. And shit, yeah, I've been able to, since then, just really pull myself up from my bootstraps and learn that I was the most important thing in my life, and develop my way, or develop myself into the man you see here, or the man you're listening to now. I have some amazing philosophies on the whole journey that I went through. Some amazing mindsets as far as how to get yourself out, on how to develop your life, and how to develop your life for the future, how to live for the now as well. And how to, I guess, mold your perspective on this reality that we find ourselves in. And that's essentially what I want to do with the War Within, guys, is I wanted to introduce you and let you guys know everything that I went through. I'm sure I left out a lot, but I just don't feel like boring you guys anymore, to be honest with you. That was a long story to tell. But yeah, there's some other stuff in there. There's some really crazy stuff that's in there. But I pulled myself out of there, like I said, and I know I'm backtracking again here a little bit, but just know that this is doable. Know that where you're at in life, you can improve your station. I think really building yourself and investing in yourself is the most important thing you can do in an ethical way as well. So that's another thing that I like to talk about is, philosophy and morals and ethics. I think it's another thing that really helps people get themselves out of the funk that they may find themselves in. They may look at what they did in the wartime situation or even in a traumatic situation as bad. And I really want to get people out of this dualistic mindset and really start to learn how to value yourself as an individual and gain value from yourself. So instead of gaining value from the way that other people see you, you are valuing yourself. You're valuing the way that you conduct yourself, your belief systems that you have, the way that you are carrying on and moving on, and also the way, like I said, of how you look at this reality, of how you look at reality and you find truth in it. So shit, that's me. That's me right now. My name's Corey Capella. Like I said, you guys can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook, Corey Capella. You can find me on YouTube at The War Within. You can find this podcast on iTunes at The War Within. And if you're listening to it, you don't need me to holler at that. Look out for a Patreon here pretty soon, guys. I am a broke college student still. So, feel free if you enjoy this to, 1, share with your friends, please. 2, leave some comments on how I can improve, what you'd like to see. 3, donate some dollars. Like I said, share the wealth, help me share the wealth, help me build up a little bit and get going. So, hey, first episode, The War Within. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being good listeners. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for supporting me as well. Hopefully this is going to be something that's insanely beneficial to you, and hopefully you can pass this on to other people so that it can help them. Take care. Have a great evening.